The water beneath the house. The rain had been falling for 3 days, not the gentle kind of rain that made people stand by windows with warm cups of coffee and listen peacefully to the drops against the glass. This rain had weight. It came down over Los Angeles in relentless sheets, filling gutters faster than they could drain, turning quiet streets into shining rivers and sending water rushing down hillsides where the dry earth could barely absorb it. Sometime before dawn, Keanu Reeves opened his eyes. At first, he didn't know what had awakened him. The bedroom was dark. The digital clock beside the bed read 4:17 a.m. Rain tapped heavily against the windows. For several seconds, Keanu remained still. Then he heard it. Drip, drip, drip. He sat up. There was something else beneath the sound of the rain. A faint rushing noise, like water moving somewhere it shouldn't. Keanu switched on the lamp, pulled on a shirt and walked into the hallway. The house felt unusually cold. He took several steps toward the stairs. Then his bare foot touched water. He stopped. A thin layer covered part of the floor. What in the world? He followed it. The water appeared to be coming from downstairs. By the time he reached the bottom of the staircase, he understood that this wasn't a small leak. Water had entered the lower level of the house. A lot of it. The basement door stood several feet away. Water was slowly seeping from underneath it. Keanu stared at the door. He had owned the house for years, but the basement was one of those spaces he rarely thought about. It wasn't mysterious. At least he had never believed it was. It was simply old. The house had undergone renovations long before he moved in, and the basement had mostly been used for storage. Boxes, old furniture, tools, things previous owners had apparently forgotten. Keanu had planned several times to clear it out. He never did. Life had a way of making tomorrow seem more convenient than today. He reached for the handle. The moment he opened the door, water rushed across his feet. Oh man! He grabbed a flashlight. The electricity to that section of the house had already shut off. He wasn't going to risk walking into standing water near electrical wiring, so he stayed near the entrance while arranging emergency help. Within the hour, professionals arrived to shut down the affected utilities and begin pumping water safely from the basement. Keanu stood nearby wearing old boots and a rain jacket, watching hoses snake through the hallway. One of the workers, a man named Daniel, came upstairs. "You caught it relatively early," Daniel said. "Could have been much worse." "That's the good news?" "That's definitely the good news. And the bad news?" Daniel looked toward the basement. "We're going to have to remove a lot of stuff." Keanu nodded. "Then we remove it." By sunrise, the rain had softened. The sky remained gray. Water continued being pumped from below. Boxes began coming upstairs one by one. Most were ruined. Old books, broken furniture, yellowed newspapers, rusting tools. Nothing particularly valuable. Nothing Keanu even recognized. He assumed much of it had belonged to someone who lived there decades earlier. Then one of the workers called him. "Mr. Reeves?" Keanu walked over. The man stood near the bottom of the basement stairs. "You might want to see this." Keanu descended carefully. The basement smelled of wet wood, mud and dust that had been disturbed after years of silence. Flashlights illuminated exposed walls. Several shelves had been moved. Behind one of them was something unusual. A door, not a normal door. A small wooden one built directly into the wall. Keanu stared. "Was that always there?" Daniel shrugged. "We couldn't see it before. The shelving covered it completely. The door was barely 5 feet high. Its wood was dark with age. There was no modern handle, only an old brass latch." Keanu stepped closer. "Could be a storage space." "Probably," Daniel said. But something about it felt strange. Not frightening, just forgotten. As if the house had been holding onto a secret no one had bothered to ask about. Daniel opened the door. Behind it was a narrow room, dry. Somehow, despite the flooding around it, the hidden room had remained mostly protected. Inside were 3 wooden shelves, a chair, a small desk, and dozens of boxes. Keanu shone his flashlight across the room. Unlike everything else in the basement, these boxes had been carefully arranged. Each one had a date written on it. 1978, 1981, 1984, 1989, 1993. The dates continued. Keanu frowned. What is all this? Daniel lifted one box carefully. It was surprisingly light. Looks like papers. They carried it into a dry area. Keanu opened the lid. Inside were hundreds of envelopes. Every envelope had a name written on the front. No addresses. Just names: Maria, Thomas, Evelyn, Joseph, Anna. Some included dates. Others had single words written beneath the names: hope, forgiveness, courage, home. Keanu picked up one envelope. It was sealed. He didn't open it. "These aren't mine," he said. Daniel nodded. "Previous owner?" "Maybe." There was something else at the bottom of the box. A photograph. Keanu lifted it. The picture showed an elderly man sitting at a wooden desk. Behind him was the same hidden room. The photograph looked decades old. On the back, written in fading ink, were 5 words: "For the days they forget." Keanu read the sentence twice. "For the days they forget what?" Daniel asked. Keanu shook his head. "I don't know." Over the next several hours, the flooding became almost secondary. The workers continued restoring the basement. Keanu continued thinking about the room. Who was the man? Why had he written hundreds, perhaps thousands, of letters? And why had someone hidden them? Later that afternoon, Keanu contacted the real estate attorney who had handled some of the property's historical records. The answer came sooner than expected. The man in the photograph appeared to be Arthur Bell, a retired schoolteacher who had lived in the house many years earlier. Arthur had no famous history. No newspaper articles, no books. No public achievements that anyone had documented. He had simply been a teacher. But there was one person who might know more. A former neighbor named Margaret Hale. She was 91 years old, and she still lived only a few miles away. Keanu arranged to speak with her. When Margaret saw the photograph, her expression changed immediately. "Oh," she whispered. "You know him?" She touched the edge of the photograph. "Arthur." Her eyes filled with recognition. "You found his room." Keanu leaned forward. "You knew about it?" "Everyone on the street knew Arthur wrote letters," she said. "But I don't think anyone knew how many. Who were they for?" Margaret smiled sadly. "People who needed them." Keanu waited. Margaret looked out the window. "Arthur lost his wife when he was still fairly young," she explained. "Cancer. After she died, he changed." "Changed how?" "First started noticing people." Keanu didn't understand. Margaret explained. "Most of us see people, Mr. Reeves. Arthur noticed them." She told him stories. Arthur noticed the grocery store clerk who had suddenly stopped smiling. He noticed the boy who sat alone at the bus stop. He noticed the widow who stopped attending neighborhood gatherings. He noticed the father working 2 jobs, whose shoes were falling apart. He noticed the teenager everyone called troublesome, but no one ever asked why he was angry. Arthur noticed, and when he believed someone was struggling, he wrote them a letter. Not advice, not lectures, letters reminding them of something good about themselves. Sometimes he delivered them. Sometimes he didn't. Why wouldn't he send them? Keanu asked. Margaret's face softened. Because sometimes he wrote letters for the future. The future? He believed people had 2 kinds of difficult days. She held up 2 fingers. The days when something bad happens. She lowered 1 finger. And the days when nothing happens, but you suddenly forget why you matter. Keanu became quiet. Margaret continued. Arthur thought the second kind could be more dangerous. Keanu looked again at the photograph. For the days they forget. Now he understood. The hidden room wasn't a collection. It was a library of reminders. Keanu returned home that evening. The rain had finally stopped. The basement remained damaged, but the hidden room had been protected. He stood inside it alone. Hundreds of names surrounded him. He wondered how many people had received Arthur's letters, and how many never had. On the desk was a drawer they hadn't opened. Keanu pulled it carefully. Inside was a notebook. The first page contained a handwritten sentence. If you are reading this, I probably ran out of time. Keanu sat down. He continued reading. My name is Arthur Bell. I have spent most of my life believing that people usually know when they are loved. I was wrong. People forget. They forget because life becomes loud. They forget because someone leaves. They forget because they fail. They forget because they compare their unfinished lives with someone else's finished photograph. And sometimes they forget, because nobody has reminded them in a very long time. So I started writing. Keanu turned the page. Arthur described his wife, Eleanor. She had been a nurse. Before she died, she made him promise something. Don't let grief make your world smaller. For 2 years after her death, Arthur failed to keep that promise. He stopped seeing friends, stopped teaching, stopped answering the phone. Then one morning he found a letter Eleanor had written before she died. It contained only a few paragraphs, but one sentence changed him. You still have kindness left to give, Arthur. Don't bury it with me. Keanu stopped reading. The basement was silent. He read the sentence again. Don't bury it with me. Arthur returned to teaching. Then he began writing letters. Over 30 years he wrote to former students, neighbors, strangers, co-workers, families, and people whose names he sometimes never knew. He wrote hundreds, eventually thousands. Some were delivered, others were stored, but why? Keanu continued reading. If these letters remain after I am gone, do not treat them as artifacts. A kind word stored in a box helps no one. Find the people if you can. If you cannot find them, find someone who needs the same words. Kindness does not expire because the original recipient disappeared. Keanu closed the notebook. He looked around the room differently now. These weren't old papers. They were unfinished promises. The next morning he began sorting. At first he planned to spend an hour. He stayed 6. The names told stories. Some letters included small notes on the envelopes. Thomas has lost his father. Maria, first person in family to attend college. Ben thinks one mistake defines him. Ruth, alone after 47 years of marriage. Keanu did not open the sealed letters. They belonged to the people whose names were written on them. But then he found one envelope that was already open. It was addressed simply to the person who finds this room. Keanu stared at it. He removed the letter. If you found this room by accident, perhaps that is appropriate. Most important things in life are discovered while we are looking for something else. You may be wondering what to do with all these letters. I cannot tell you. I can only tell you what I learned. People do not always need saving. Sometimes they need witnessing. They need someone to say, I saw how hard you tried. I saw what you carried. I saw that you stayed when leaving would have been easier. I saw you fail and try again. I saw you be kind when nobody rewarded you for it. I saw you. If you have the ability to remind someone they matter, do it while you still can. Do not wait for the perfect words. Time has never promised us another conversation. Keanu lowered the paper. Outside, workers were repairing the flood damage. Hammers struck wood. Machines hummed. Life continued. But Keanu remained in the chair, thinking. There are moments that change people dramatically. A birth, a death, a victory, a loss. And then there are quieter moments, moments that do not announce themselves. A sentence, a photograph, a letter written by someone who died long before you knew their name. Those moments can change something too. Keanu looked at the boxes. Thousands of envelopes, thousands of names. He couldn't find everyone. Some were probably gone. Others had moved across the country. Many names were too common to trace, but maybe that wasn't the point. Arthur had already answered that problem. If you cannot find them, find someone who needs the same words. Keanu took out his phone. He called Daniel. Hey, Keanu said. About the basement. More water? No? That's good. I need to change the restoration plan. How? The hidden room. What about it? Don't tear it down. Daniel paused. Okay. I want it restored exactly as it was. Same shelves? Same shelves. Same desk? Everything. Daniel laughed lightly. You found treasure down there. Keanu looked at Arthur's notebook. Maybe. He ended the call. Then he noticed something. Under the desk was a loose floorboard. That had shifted slightly from the moisture. Keanu knelt. He lifted it. Beneath it was a metal box, small, locked. Unlike the letters, there was no dust on its top. Someone had protected it carefully before hiding it. Keanu found a tiny key taped beneath Arthur's desk. It fit. The lock clicked. Inside the box were 7 envelopes. Only 7. Each was thicker than the others. 6 had names. One did not. The unnamed envelope had a message written across the front. Open this last. Keanu looked at the 6 names. He recognized none of them, but attached to the first envelope was an old newspaper clipping. A photograph showed a young boy standing beside Arthur. Beneath it was a headline about a local school fundraiser. The boy's name was Samuel Carter. Keanu searched through Arthur's notebook. There, Samuel Carter. Page 214, the entry was short. Samuel believes his life is already decided by where he started. He is wrong. If I cannot convince him, perhaps time will. Below it was an address, and one final sentence. Give him the blue envelope when he turns 50. Keanu looked at the envelope. It was blue. He checked the date. Samuel would have turned 50. 3 weeks ago. Keanu sat completely still. Arthur had written the letter decades earlier. A letter meant to arrive now. He had no idea whether Samuel Carter was alive. No idea where he lived. No idea what the letter contained. But for the first time since discovering the room, Keanu felt something beyond curiosity. Responsibility. Arthur had died before finishing what he started. The flood had uncovered the room, and now somehow a 30-year-old promise had landed in Keanu's hands. He placed the blue envelope carefully on the desk. Finding Samuel might be impossible, but impossible and inconvenient were not the same thing. And Keanu had learned long ago that sometimes the most meaningful journeys begin with a simple decision. Try. Over the next 2 days, the search began. Public records led nowhere. Old addresses were outdated. The school had closed years ago. Former teachers had moved or died. Samuel Carter was a common name. There were hundreds. Then Margaret remembered something. Samuel had a younger sister. Name? Claire. That single detail changed everything. A former student directory mentioned Claire Carter. A later record connected her to a small community organization in Northern California. Keanu made a call. A woman answered. Hello? Is this Claire Carter? Who's asking? My name is Keanu. Silence. Then a cautious laugh. Okay, Keanu smiled. That's fair. He explained that he was trying to locate Samuel Carter, who had once been a student of Arthur Bell. The silence on the other end changed. Arthur Bell? You knew him. Everyone in our family knew Mr. Bell. Keanu looked at the blue envelope. Is Samuel your brother? Another silence, longer. Yes. Is he? He's alive. Keanu exhaled. I have something that belongs to him. What? A letter. Claire didn't respond. A letter from Arthur. Keanu heard her inhale sharply. That's impossible. Why? Because Mr. Bell died years ago. I know. Then what are you talking about? Keanu looked around the hidden room. It's a long story. Claire's voice became quiet. Where did you find it? In his old house. Another silence. Then she said something Keanu didn't expect. You need to understand something before you give Samuel that letter. What? My brother hasn't spoken Arthur Bell's name in almost 30 years. Why? Claire hesitated. Because the last conversation they ever had ended badly. Keanu sat down. How badly? Samuel said something he regretted. What? I don't know exactly. Did Arthur ever tell you? No. Keanu looked at Arthur's note again. Samuel believes his life is already decided by where he started. He is wrong. Where is Samuel now? Claire gave him a town. Then she added, but I don't know if he'll take the letter. That's his decision. You'd really travel all that way just to hand someone an old envelope. Keanu looked at the hundreds of unfinished letters surrounding him. Someone waited 30 years to receive it. That afternoon, Keanu packed lightly. Before leaving, he returned to the basement. He placed Arthur's notebook safely inside a protective case. Then he picked up the blue envelope. As he turned to leave, his eyes moved toward the metal box. 6 envelopes remained, including the unnamed one. Open this last. He wondered what Arthur had hidden inside it, but he didn't touch it, not yet. Some stories reveal themselves only when you're ready for the next page. And this one had only just begun. The flood had seemed like a disaster. Water had damaged floors, walls, furniture, and years of forgotten belongings. But sometimes destruction exposes what ordinary days keep hidden. Beneath a flooded house, behind an old shelf, inside a room no one knew existed, Keanu Reeves had discovered something more valuable than money. Thousands of reminders that human beings often carry invisible battles, and somewhere hundreds of miles away was a man named Samuel Carter, a man who had no idea that words written for him 30 years earlier were finally on their way. Keanu placed the blue envelope beside him. The road stretched ahead. The rain clouds were disappearing behind the mountains. He did not know what Samuel would say. He did not know what was written inside the letter. And he certainly did not know that finding Samuel would uncover the real reason Arthur had hidden those final 7 envelopes. A reason connected to a promise, a forgotten act of kindness, and a secret that had quietly changed far more lives than anyone realized. But Keanu was about to find out. Because sometimes a flood doesn't only destroy, sometimes it uncovers. Sometimes what looks like the worst morning imaginable opens a door that was hidden for decades. And sometimes the greatest treasure buried beneath a house isn't gold. It is proof that someone somewhere cared enough to remember your name. The letter that waited 30 years. The blue envelope rested on the passenger seat. For nearly 4 hours, Keanu Reeves barely looked at it. He didn't need to. He could feel its presence beside him. Outside the window, Los Angeles slowly disappeared behind highways, hills, and long stretches of open road. The storm that had flooded his house was moving east, leaving behind a sky washed clean by rain. The mountains in the distance looked unusually sharp. Every tree seemed greener. Every field seemed brighter. It was strange how the world could look renewed after a storm. Keanu thought about that. Maybe people were like that too. Maybe sometimes something had to break open before you could see what had been hidden underneath. He glanced at the envelope. Samuel Carter. The handwriting belonged to Arthur Bell, a schoolteacher who had been dead for years, a man Keanu had never met. And yet Arthur's words had somehow pulled him hundreds of miles from home. Keanu still didn't know exactly why he was doing this. He could have mailed the letter. He could have asked Claire to deliver it. He could have hired someone to locate Samuel. Any of those choices would have been easier. But something about Arthur's notebook had stayed with him. If you have the ability to remind someone they matter, do it while you still can. There was urgency in those words. Not panic, not fear. Just the wisdom of someone who had lived long enough to understand that human beings often postponed the things that mattered most. Apologies, thank yous, forgiveness, love. We told ourselves there would be another day, another phone call, another dinner, another Christmas, another chance. Until sometimes there wasn't. Keanu continued driving. By late afternoon, the highway narrowed. Cities became towns. Towns became small clusters of buildings separated by farmland and pine-covered hills. The address Claire had given him belonged to a place called Pine Creek, population 2,184. There was one grocery store, one gas station, a diner with a faded red sign, a hardware store, a church, and a main street that looked as though it had resisted changing for 40 years. Keanu parked outside the diner. He had been driving for hours and needed coffee. Inside, only 6 people occupied the booths. A waitress approached. "Coffee? Please." She poured without asking anything else. Keanu appreciated that. He sat near the window. Across the street stood an old building with a wooden sign. Carter Woodworks. Keanu stared at it. That had to be the place. He checked the address Claire had written down. It matched. He finished his coffee, paid, then sat for another minute. The blue envelope was inside his jacket. Suddenly delivering it didn't feel simple anymore. 30 years. 30 years was a long time to wait for words. What if Samuel didn't want them? What if Arthur's letter reopened something painful? What if Keanu had misunderstood everything? Arthur had written, "Give him the blue envelope when he turns 50. Samuel had recently turned 50. That was clear. But Arthur had never written who should deliver it. Maybe no one was supposed to. Maybe some letters were written simply because the writer needed to say something. Keanu looked across the street. Then he remembered another line from Arthur's notebook. A kind word stored in a box helps no one. That decided it. He walked outside. A small bell rang when he opened the door to Carter Woodworks. The smell hit him immediately. Cedar, pine, sawdust, warm varnish. The workshop was beautiful. Handmade tables stood along one wall. Chairs hung from wooden beams. Shelves displayed carved boxes, bowls, picture frames, and small wooden toys. At the back of the shop, a man was sanding the edge of a table. He was broad-shouldered, grey beginning to appear in his dark beard. His hands looked strong, working hands, the kind marked by small cuts, scars, and years of making things. He switched off the sander. "Be with you in a second." Keanu waited. The man removed his safety glasses, then looked up. His expression changed. He stared. Keanu gave a small smile. "Samuel Carter?" The man didn't answer immediately. "Then, depends. On what?" "Why Keanu Reeves is standing in my workshop?" Keanu laughed softly. "Fair question." Samuel put down the sanding block. "If this is some kind of movie location thing, you're about 20 years too late. Building looks better from the outside." "No movie. Then I'm officially confused. My name is Keanu." "I know." "Right." Samuel folded his arms. "What can I do for you?" Keanu reached slowly into his jacket. He removed the envelope. The moment Samuel saw it, something happened. His face changed, not dramatically, just enough. His eyes narrowed. His shoulders became still. Keanu placed the envelope on the counter. "I think this belongs to you." Samuel didn't touch it. He stared at the handwriting. Then at Keanu. "Where did you get that?" "In a house that used to belong to Arthur Bell." Silence. The warmth disappeared from Samuel's expression. "Who told you that name?" "Your sister." Samuel looked away. "Claire. She helped me find you." Samuel walked toward the window. For several seconds he said nothing. Then, "You drove here to give me that?" "Yes. Why?" "Because Arthur apparently wanted you to receive it when you turned 50. Samuel laughed. But there was no humor in it. "That's impossible. That's what Claire said. Arthur's dead." "I know. He died years ago." "I know." Samuel turned. "Then how does a dead man know I turned 50? "He wrote it decades ago." Samuel stared at the envelope again. Keanu continued. "I found a hidden room in his old house." Samuel's eyes moved sharply toward him. "What room?" "A room behind a basement wall." Samuel went pale. "You found the letter room?" Now it was Keanu's turn to be surprised. "You knew about it?" Samuel sat slowly in a chair. "I knew he had one." "You'd been inside?" "No, but you knew." Samuel nodded. "When I was a kid, everybody knew Mr. Bell wrote letters. We just didn't know where he kept them." Keanu pushed the envelope slightly closer. Samuel didn't take it. Instead, he asked, "Did you read it?" "No." "You're lying." "I'm not." "You drove hundreds of miles without opening it?" "It's addressed to you." Samuel stared at him, then shook his head. People don't usually respect boundaries that much. Maybe they should. Something in Samuel's expression softened, but only slightly. He looked again at the envelope. "I don't want it." Keanu hadn't expected those words. "You don't have to take it." "Good." Keanu nodded. He picked up the envelope. Samuel looked surprised. "That's it?" "What do you mean?" "You're not going to convince me." "No." "No speech?" "No. You're an actor. Aren't speeches kind of your thing?" Keanu smiled. "Only when somebody writes them for me." Samuel almost smiled. Almost. Keanu placed the envelope back inside his jacket. "I'll leave." He turned toward the door. Behind him, Samuel spoke. "Wait." Keanu stopped. Samuel's voice was quieter. "What did Arthur write about me?" Keanu turned. "I didn't read your letter." "Not the letter." Samuel swallowed. "His notebook." Keanu hesitated, then repeated the words. "Samuel believes his life is already decided by where he started." "He is wrong." Samuel closed his eyes. For a moment he seemed to be somewhere else. Somewhere 30 years earlier. He remembered that. Keanu said nothing. Samuel sat down. "Coffee?" Keanu looked around. "Sure." Samuel pointed toward a machine in the corner. "It's terrible. That's usually my kind." 5 minutes later, they sat behind the workshop. There was a small porch overlooking a river. The water moved slowly between tall trees. Samuel held his coffee with both hands. Neither man spoke for a while. Then Samuel said, "I was 17 when I met Arthur." He looked toward the river. "My father left when I was 9. Keanu listened. "My mother worked nights at a hospital laundry. We didn't have much." Samuel laughed quietly. Actually, that's generous. We had almost nothing. He pointed toward the workshop. You see all this? Keanu nodded. I built it, I figured. No inheritance. No investors. No family money. He looked at his hands. I started with a borrowed saw and $73. There was pride in his voice, but also something else, a wound beneath it. Arthur was my English teacher. Samuel smiled faintly. I hated English. Why? Books seemed pointless. He laughed. We barely had enough money for electricity, and Arthur wanted me to analyze poetry. Keanu smiled. Hard sell. Exactly. Samuel took a drink. But Arthur... He paused. Arthur didn't teach books. What did he teach? People. Keanu thought of Margaret's words. Most of us see people. Arthur noticed them. Samuel continued. He knew when a kid hadn't eaten breakfast. He knew when someone was wearing the same clothes because they didn't own anything else. He knew which kids were, pretending not to care about grades because failing. Hurt less if you acted like you didn't try. Samuel looked toward Keanu. I was one of those kids. What changed? Arthur. Samuel smiled sadly. One day he kept me after class. I thought I was in trouble. He handed me a piece of wood. Wood. Small piece of walnut. Samuel held his fingers apart. About this big. He asked me what I saw. I said, wood. He said, wrong. Keanu smiled. What was the right answer? He said, possibility. Samuel laughed. I thought he was insane. Arthur took Samuel to the school workshop. He showed him how wood could be cut, sanded, joined, shaped, restored. He told me something I never forgot. Samuel looked toward the trees. He said, where something begins does not decide what it becomes. Keanu felt the sentence settle between them. Samuel continued. I started spending every afternoon in that workshop. Furniture. At first, terrible birdhouses. Keanu laughed. How terrible! Birds would have filed complaints. Both men laughed. Then Samuel's expression changed again. But eventually I got good. Arthur helped him apply to a woodworking program. Fair, prestigious one. Samuel was accepted. Full scholarship. It should have changed everything. But it didn't? Samuel shook his head. My mother got sick. The river continued moving. Nothing terminal, but bad enough that she couldn't work. Samuel had a younger sister, Claire. Bills piled up. Rent was overdue. Food became uncertain. So I decided not to go. Arthur disagreed. He went crazy. Samuel smiled bitterly. He told me there were programs, assistants, people who could help. But I was 17. 17-year-old boys know everything. Keanu smiled faintly. I remember. Samuel looked down. We argued. He told me if I gave up the scholarship, I might regret it. I told him... He stopped. Keanu waited. Samuel's jaw tightened. I told him he didn't understand people like us. Silence. I told him it was easy for him to talk about dreams because he had a house. I told him some of us didn't get dreams. Samuel's eyes had become wet. And then I said something worse. Keanu remained quiet. I told him he only helped broken kids because it made him feel important. Samuel stared at the river. I told him nobody actually needed him. The words seemed to hurt even 33 years later. Arthur didn't argue. He just looked at me. Then he said, I hope someday you become old enough to forgive the boy saying those words. Samuel wiped his face quickly. I walked out. Did you ever speak again? No. I left school. Started working. Then we moved. Years later, I heard Arthur died. Samuel looked at Keanu. So whatever is inside that envelope... He pointed toward Keanu's jacket. I don't need it. Keanu studied him. You've been thinking about that conversation for 30 years. Samuel looked away. That doesn't mean I need the letter. No, Keanu nodded. But maybe Arthur knew you would. Samuel stood abruptly. I said I don't want it. Okay, Keanu stood too. There was no anger in his voice. I'll take it back. That seemed to unsettle Samuel more than pressure would have. Keanu walked toward the workshop. Samuel remained outside. Keanu reached the front door. Then Samuel called, Did he write anything else? Keanu stopped. What? About me. In the notebook, Keanu thought. One more line, Samuel waited. "Give him the blue envelope when he turns 50. Samuel stared. "Why 50? "I don't know." Samuel looked toward the floor. Then slowly, "My father was 50 when he died." Keanu said nothing. Samuel walked to a cabinet. He opened a drawer. Inside was an old photograph. He handed it to Keanu. The photograph showed a 17-year-old Samuel standing beside Arthur. Samuel held a wooden chair. Arthur stood beside him smiling. On the back was handwriting. "First chair. Crooked legs. Excellent beginning." Keanu smiled. Samuel laughed. "He wouldn't let me throw it away. Do you still have it?" Samuel pointed. In the corner of the workshop sat an old wooden chair. One leg was visibly crooked. Keanu looked from the chair to Samuel. "Seems like you kept it too." Samuel didn't answer. Instead, he held out his hand. "The letter." Keanu removed the blue envelope. He placed it in Samuel's palm. Samuel stared at it for almost a minute. Then he opened it. Inside were 4 pages. The handwriting was careful. Samuel began reading silently. His expression changed after the first paragraph, then again after the second. By the middle of the second page, he sat down. Keanu moved away. This moment didn't belong to him. He walked toward the window and looked outside. Behind him, he heard Samuel inhale sharply. Then silence. A long silence. Finally, Keanu. He turned. Samuel held the letter. "You need to hear this. You don't have to share it." "I know," Samuel wiped his eyes. "But I think that's why you're here." He began reading. "Dear Samuel, if this letter reached you at the right time, you are 50 years old. That probably sounds ancient to the 17-year-old version of you I remember. I hope 50 feels younger from where you're sitting." Samuel laughed through tears. He continued, "You once told me that some people don't get dreams. I have spent years thinking about those words. I believe I answered you poorly. I tried to convince you that you could have the future I imagined for you. I should have asked what future you needed. There is a difference." Samuel stopped. His hands trembled. He continued, "You believed I was disappointed because you gave up your scholarship. I was not. I was afraid. I was afraid that responsibility would convince you that your own life had no value unless you sacrificed it for everyone else. Helping your family was honorable. Erasing yourself was not." Samuel lowered the page. Keanu felt those words deeply. How many people did that? How many became so useful to everyone else that they forgot they were allowed to exist beyond what they provided? Samuel continued, "You also said something cruel to me. I remember it. You probably remember it too. I forgave you before you reached the end of the hallway." Samuel stopped reading. His face collapsed. 33 years. 33 years of guilt, gone in one sentence. "I forgave you before you reached the end of the hallway." Samuel covered his face. Keanu quietly sat nearby. He didn't touch him, didn't interrupt, didn't tell him everything was okay. Some emotions didn't need to be fixed. They needed space. Eventually, Samuel continued, "You were 17. You were scared. Your mother was ill. You believed adulthood had arrived before you were ready. A frightened person sometimes throws pain at the nearest person, standing close enough to catch it. I happened to be standing there. I never blamed you." Samuel's voice broke again. Then he reached the final page. "There is something else you should know. You believed you gave up your future. I disagree. A future is not a single road. Miss one turn and another appears. Maybe you became a carpenter, maybe a teacher, maybe a father, maybe none of those things. Whatever you became, I hope you built something. Not because I taught you woodworking, because building is what you were always meant to do. Build furniture, build a family, build friendships, build a quiet life, build something that makes another person feel safe. And when you are 50, if you still believe that 17-year-old boy ruined everything, please tell him something for me. He survived. He did the best he could, and he is allowed to put the burden down now." Samuel could no longer continue. He handed the final page to Keanu. At the bottom was one last paragraph. Keanu read silently. "When you finish this letter, look beneath the first thing you ever built. You'll know what I mean." "Arthur?" Keanu looked up. Samuel was already staring across the workshop, at the crooked chair. Neither man spoke. They walked toward it. Samuel turned the chair over. Nothing. He examined the legs. Then the seat. On the underside was a thin wooden panel. Samuel frowned. "I've had this chair for 33 years. He ran his fingers along the edge. There, a tiny groove. He inserted a screwdriver. The panel opened. Something fell onto the floor. A key and a folded piece of paper. Samuel picked up the note. Only 3 words were written on it. "The station locker." Samuel stared. "What station?" Keanu asked. Samuel already knew. The old train station. Pine Creek had once had a railway station. It closed 25 years earlier. The building still stood near the edge of town. Now it served as a historical museum. They arrived 15 minutes before closing. An elderly volunteer named Helen was preparing to lock the doors. Samuel explained that they were looking for an old locker. Helen looked skeptical. Most were removed during renovation. Most. 6 remain. They walked to the old waiting room. Along one wall stood 6 iron lockers. Numbers faded. Samuel looked at the key. Stamped into the metal 214, locker 214. He inserted the key. It turned. Inside was a wooden box. Samuel removed it. The box contained no money. No valuables. Only photographs, dozens, students, families, children, people receiving letters. Arthur standing beside graduates. Arthur at weddings. Arthur visiting hospitals. Arthur sitting at kitchen tables. And beneath the photographs was a ledger. Samuel opened it. Names, thousands of names, dates, letters sent. Letters delivered. Outcomes when Arthur knew them. Then Keanu noticed something. A symbol beside certain names. A small circle. Exactly 7 names had circles. Samuel Carter was one. The other 6 matched the envelopes in the metal box beneath Arthur's desk, including the unnamed envelope. But beside the final entry was something different. No name. Only the last letter is not for a person. Samuel looked at Keanu. What does that mean? Keanu shook his head. Below it was another sentence. When 6 return, the 7th will make sense. Samuel stared at him. 6 return where? Keanu thought immediately of the basement. The room. They turned another page. There was a photograph taped inside. 7 teenagers stood together. Arthur behind them. Samuel was one. He looked about 17. Samuel touched the photograph. "I haven't seen these people in 30 years. You know them?" "Some," he pointed. "That's Rachel, Marcus, David, Elena, Jonah, and..." His finger stopped. The 7th teenager was a girl. Samuel became completely still. Keanu noticed. "Who is she?" Samuel didn't answer. "Samuel?" His voice was barely audible. "Emily? Emily who?" Samuel looked at him. "Emily Bell," Keanu frowned. "Bell?" Samuel nodded. "Arthur's daughter. That changed everything." Margaret had never mentioned Arthur having a daughter. Neither had the property records Keanu reviewed. Samuel turned the photograph over. On the back was a date, 33 years earlier, and a sentence, "The 7 who promised." Samuel sat down. "I forgot about this. What promise?" Samuel stared at the photograph. "We were kids. What did you promise?" Samuel's expression changed as an old memory returned. "Arthur created something." "What?" "A project. He called it the Open Door," Samuel explained. "Arthur believed students who came from difficult homes needed somewhere to go after school. Not an institution, not a program filled with paperwork. Just a safe place, a workshop, a library, food, adults who listened. He wanted to buy an abandoned building near the school," Samuel said. "The 7 of us promised that when we grew up, we'd come back and help him build it." Keanu looked at the photograph. "Did you?" Samuel shook his head. "Life happened. Rachel moved. Marcus joined the military. David disappeared. Elena went to college. Jonah..." He stopped. "What?" "I don't know. And Emily?" Samuel looked away. "Emily died." The room became silent. "She was 19. What happened?" "Car accident." Keanu looked again at the 7 envelopes. Now there were 6 living names and 1 unnamed letter. 6 return. The seventh will make sense. Samuel whispered. This was never about letters. Keanu understood. It was about the promise. That night they returned to Samuel's workshop. They spread the ledger, photographs, and Arthur's letter across a large wooden table. Keanu called Margaret. He asked about the open door. She became silent. I wondered if you would find that. You knew? Some of it. Why didn't you tell me? Because it wasn't my story to finish. Keanu looked at Samuel. Did Arthur ever build it? No. Why? After Emily died, he stopped. Margaret's voice became soft. Not because he stopped believing. Because the 7 young people who were supposed to help build it scattered. He couldn't do it alone. Keanu looked at the ledger. Maybe he wasn't supposed to. After the call, Samuel walked around the workshop. Rachel. He pointed at the photograph. Last I heard, she became a nurse. Marcus ran a construction company. Elena became a lawyer. Jonah. Samuel frowned. I think Jonah became a teacher. Keanu looked at him. And you became a builder. Samuel stared. The realization hit both men simultaneously. A nurse, a builder, a construction expert, a lawyer, a teacher. Arthur hadn't chosen those teenagers randomly. He had watched them grow. He had believed that one day together they would have exactly what was needed to build the open door. Maybe not physically, but symbolically. A place where young people could find safety, guidance, skills, belonging. A place Arthur had dreamed about, but never lived long enough to create. Keanu looked at the 6 remaining envelopes. We need to find them, Samuel laughed. You say that like it's easy. We found you. You had my sister. Then we'll find someone else's sister. Samuel shook his head. You really do this? What, just keep going? Keanu thought about the question. No. He looked at Arthur's letter. Sometimes I stop. Sometimes I get tired. Sometimes I don't know what I'm doing. He looked towards Samuel. But I think there's a difference between not knowing where you're going and knowing you shouldn't quit. Samuel nodded slowly. Then he picked up the photograph. Rachel first. Over the next week, the search expanded. Rachel was found in Oregon. She had spent 26 years working as a pediatric nurse. When Samuel called, she cried before he finished explaining. Marcus lived in Arizona. He had indeed started a construction company. He initially refused to participate. Then Samuel sent him a photograph of Arthur. Marcus called back 10 minutes later. I'm in. Elena lived in Chicago. She had become an attorney specializing in non-profit organizations. When Keanu spoke with her, she remained silent for almost a minute, then said, I've been waiting 30 years for someone to remind me of that promise. Jonah was harder. They eventually found him in New Mexico. He had been a high school teacher for 22 years. When Samuel asked why he became a teacher, Jonah answered, Arthur. That left David. No one could find him. Weeks passed. The flooded basement was restored, but Keanu refused to modernize the hidden room. The old shelves remained. The desk remained. Even Arthur's chair remained. 5 envelopes had been delivered. Each contained a personal letter. Each ended with the same instruction, return when you are ready. One by one they came. Samuel, Rachel, Marcus, Elena, Jonah, 5 people who had not stood together since they were teenagers. They entered Arthur's hidden room quietly. They looked older, different. Life had changed all of them. But when they saw the photograph on the desk, something extraordinary happened. For a moment, they became 17 again. Rachel touched Arthur's chair. He used to tap his pencil when he was thinking. Jonah laughed. Constantly. Marcus pointed at the shelves. He kept terrible cookies in those tins. Those were crackers, Elena said. They were cookies. They were absolutely crackers. They laughed. And then they cried. Because grief does strange things with time. Someone can be gone 30 years. Then one familiar memory brings them back for 3 seconds. The way they laughed. The way they walked. The way they said your name. Keanu watched from the doorway. He realized something. Arthur had been right. People needed witnessing. These 5 weren't mourning only Arthur. They were witnessing one another. Proof that they had survived. Proof that the frightened teenagers in the photograph had somehow become adults. Then Samuel looked at the empty space beside the photograph. David should be here. No one spoke. Keanu had spent weeks searching. Nothing. Then Rachel remembered. He changed his name. Everyone looked at her. What? David's stepfather adopted him. Last name? She closed her eyes, trying to remember. Mercer. David Mercer. The search took 20 minutes. There were many, but only one matched the age and hometown. A phone number appeared. Samuel called. Disconnected. An address, Nevada. Keanu decided to go. 2 days later, he stood outside a small house near Reno. The yard was overgrown. Paint peeled from the porch. He knocked. No answer. Again, nothing. A neighbor approached. You looking for David? Yes, he's at St. Matthew's. A church. The neighbor shook his head. Hospice. Keanu felt his stomach drop. He found David that afternoon. David Mercer was 51, cancer, advanced. He was awake when Keanu entered. He looked thin, tired, but alert. Keanu introduced himself. David stared. You're kidding. Keanu smiled. I get that sometimes. Then he showed him the envelope. David's eyes filled immediately. Arthur, you recognize the handwriting? I'd recognize it anywhere. Keanu handed him the letter. David held it against his chest. I thought everyone forgot. They didn't. David looked toward the window. I forgot. What? The promise. Keanu sat beside him. Maybe forgetting isn't the same as abandoning. David looked at him. Keanu continued. Sometimes life just gets loud. David smiled. That sounds like Arthur. It probably is. David opened the letter. He read slowly. Halfway through he laughed. Then cried. At the end he closed his eyes. Can you take me there? Keanu knew what he meant. To the room. David nodded. The 6 have to return. Doctors initially advised against travel. But David insisted. Arrangements were made carefully. 3 days later, 6 people entered Arthur's hidden room. Samuel, Rachel, Marcus, Elena, Jonah, David. 6 teenagers, 33 years older. David sat in Arthur's chair. Well, he whispered. We're late, Samuel laughed. Only 33 years. Arthur hated lateness. Everyone smiled. Then Keanu placed the final envelope on the desk. The unnamed one. Open this last. No one moved. Finally, David said, I think now means now. Samuel opened it. Inside was not a letter. It was a deed, an old property deed, and a note. Eleanor examined the document. Her eyes widened. The building. What building? Keanu asked. She looked at Samuel. The open door. Arthur had purchased the abandoned building after all. He had never built the project, but he had bought the property and legally transferred it into a trust intended for one purpose, a youth center. The note explained everything. If the 6 of you return, you may decide together what happens next. You owe me nothing. A promise made at 17 should not imprison the person you become. If you wish to sell the building, sell it. If you wish to forget this room, forget it. But if even one of you still believes young people deserve a place where their beginnings do not decide their endings, then open the door. No one spoke. David began crying quietly. Marcus looked at Samuel. Samuel looked at Rachel. Rachel looked at Elena. Jonah stared at Arthur's photograph. Finally, Samuel said, I spent my whole life building furniture. Marcus nodded. I spent mine building buildings. Rachel smiled. I spent mine helping kids. Elena added, I know how to build the non-profit. Jonah laughed softly. I suppose somebody has to teach. They looked at David. David smiled weakly. I don't have much time. His voice trembled. But I've got enough. Enough for what? Keanu asked. David looked around the room. To open the door. The building still existed, barely. The next morning they drove to see it. It stood 20 miles away, abandoned, windows broken, roof damaged, graffiti covering the walls. Samuel stepped inside. Sunlight came through holes in the ceiling. Marcus examined the structure. It's bad. How bad? Rachel asked. Marcus smiled. Perfect, everyone laughed. Keanu stood in the center of the empty building. He imagined it. A workshop. A library. A kitchen. Music rooms. Counseling spaces. Tables filled with teenagers doing homework. Adults listening. Young people learning skills. A place where nobody had to pretend everything was okay. Samuel walked beside him. You know what Arthur would say? What? He'd say we're standing inside possibility. Keanu smiled. Construction began 3 months later. Marcus donated labor. Samuel built furniture. Rachel designed a wellness program. Elena established the foundation. Jonah created educational partnerships. David, from his hospital bed, helped choose the name. They called it the Open Door. But David never saw the finished building. He died 6 weeks before opening day. At his funeral, Samuel placed Arthur's letter beside him. Not because David needed the words anymore, because the letter had completed its journey. Opening day arrived on a bright autumn morning. Hundreds attended. But there was no giant celebrity ceremony. No red carpet. No flashing spectacle. Just people, families, teachers, students, neighbors. Above the entrance hung a simple wooden sign made by Samuel. The open door below it. Where you begin does not decide what you become. Keanu stood at the back. He didn't want the attention. This wasn't his story. It belonged to Arthur, to Eleanor, to Samuel, to Rachel, Marcus, Elena, Jonah, David, and to every young person who would walk through those doors carrying a burden nobody else could see. A boy approached Keanu, maybe 16. You built this? Keanu shook his head. No. Who did? Keanu looked around. Lots of people. The boy looked at the quote above the door. Do you believe that? What? That where you begin doesn't decide what you become. Keanu thought about his answer. I think where you begin matters. The boy seemed surprised. It does? Sure. It shapes you. It can hurt you. It can teach you. It can leave scars. Keanu paused. But a beginning isn't an ending, the boy nodded. Then walked inside. Keanu watched him go. Later that evening, after everyone left, Samuel found Keanu sitting alone in the workshop. On the table between them was Arthur's photograph. We finished it, Samuel said. Keanu shook his head. No, Samuel frowned. No? Keanu looked through the glass doors. At the empty classrooms. The workshop. The library. The kitchen. You opened it, he smiled. That's different from finishing it, Samuel understood. Places like this were never finished. Every person who entered would add something. A story, a failure. A recovery, a dream. A second chance. Samuel sat beside him. You know, none of this happens without the flood. Keanu nodded. Funny? What? We spend so much time wishing bad things hadn't happened. Samuel looked toward him. Are you saying the flood was good? No. Keanu shook his head. Damage is damage, he thought carefully. But sometimes we get to decide what grows after it. Samuel smiled. Arthur would have liked that. They sat quietly. Then Samuel reached into his pocket. I almost forgot. He handed Keanu a small folded paper. What is this? We found it inside the final envelope. Keanu frowned. There was something else. Samuel nodded. It was underneath the deed. Keanu unfolded it. Arthur's handwriting. Only one sentence. The person who finds the room has one letter left to deliver. Keanu stared. One letter? Samuel placed a small envelope on the table. Keanu's name was written on it. Keanu, he froze. That's impossible, Samuel nodded. Exactly what I said. Keanu picked it up. The handwriting appeared different. Not Arthur's, newer. He turned it over. On the back was a date. The day before the flood. Keanu stopped breathing for a second. Who wrote this? Samuel shook his head. No idea. Keanu opened it. Inside was a single page. He read the first line, then stopped. Samuel watched his face. What does it say? Keanu read it again. The message began. Dear Keanu, if you found Arthur's room, then the water reached the basement exactly as I feared it someday would. You don't know me. But I know this house. I know Arthur's letters, and there is something you still haven't discovered. The room behind the shelves is not the only hidden room. Keanu looked up. Samuel's expression changed. What? Keanu continued reading. Behind the north wall is another door. Arthur sealed it himself. Do not open it unless the open door has been completed. Because what is inside was never meant for Arthur's students. It was meant for the people who came after them. At the bottom was a signature. Keanu read the name twice, then looked at Samuel. Samuel whispered, "Who wrote it?" Keanu turned the page toward him. Samuel saw the signature. His face went completely pale, because the letter was signed Eleanor Bell, Arthur's wife, the woman everyone believed had died before Arthur ever began writing his letters. And beneath her name was one final sentence: "Arthur kept his promise. Now it is time for you to discover why the letters truly began." Back at Keanu's house, hundreds of miles away, the restored basement sat silent. Arthur's desk remained exactly where it had been. The shelves stood untouched, and behind the north wall, invisible beneath decades of plaster and wood, something waited in darkness. Something Arthur had sealed away. Something connected to Eleanor. Something that had been hidden longer than the letters themselves. The flood had revealed one secret, but it had not revealed everything, not even close. And when Keanu finally opened that second hidden room, he would discover that Arthur Bell's greatest act of kindness had never been the thousands of letters. It was something much larger, something that had quietly traveled from person to person for decades, a chain of kindness connecting strangers who never knew one another. And at the center of it all was one question Arthur had spent his entire life trying to answer: what happens when one ordinary act of kindness refuses to end? Keanu folded the letter carefully. Outside the open door, evening settled over the town. Through the windows, the wooden sign above the entrance remained visible. "Where you begin does not decide what you become." Samuel stood beside him. "So what do we do now?" Keanu looked at Eleanor's letter, then toward the road home. "We find the second room." And neither of them knew that behind that wall waited a discovery that would transform Arthur's forgotten letters into something far greater than either of them could imagine. Because some stories are written in books, some are written in letters, but the most powerful stories are written quietly, from one human life into another. And those stories do not end when someone dies. They continue every time kindness is passed forward.